Microsoft Word. It's our most used program for word processing, but did you know that you can also use it for page design in a way that's maybe even comparable to advanced industry standard platforms like InDesign and Illustrator? Today, I'm going to be walking you through a tutorial of how to use some advanced features in Microsoft Word to make reports and other messages stand out. Now, you might ask me, Allegra, why are you teaching us Word, something we already know, rather than an industry standard tool like Adobe InDesign? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First, you gotta crawl before you can walk. It's easier when you're just starting to learn things like design principles and page layout to apply them in a program you have some familiarity with, like Word, which you've probably been using for years, rather than just dumping off the deep end into something new like InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, or another layout program. Second, nearly everyone has access to Word. In the future, when you're in the workplace, maybe you'll be working for a nonprofit that's strapped for cash, or a startup on a shoestring budget that can't afford the full Adobe Creative Suite. You might not be able to afford industry standard design tools, but you probably can afford access to Word. So it's good to know how to use all of its features to create the type of page layouts you want. First off, one of the best ways to take advantage of what Word has to offer is to actually expand its library of fonts and other design elements. We have a bunch of fonts installed system standard here in Word, but a great way to punch up your documents or make them stand out is to download and get access to new free fonts. Two of my favorite websites for this are fontsquirrel.com and DaFont. Also, Google has its own repository of fonts at fonts.google.com. The Google Web Fonts collection you can use in documents as well as on websites. Now, be careful with font licensing. If you're working for a company, you likely have licensed fonts in your library beyond the system standard couple of dozen fonts that Microsoft or Apple provides, but you're going to want to make sure that you're covered under copyright for these. Now, if you're working on a school computer like I am, you're limited to the fonts that are already installed, which are what we call system standard fonts. Things that are probably pretty familiar to you, like Arial, Times New Roman, Georgia, Garamond, Calibri. So what if we can't install any new fonts? You don't have permission on university computers, or maybe even on your work computer, to change the font library. So what do you do then? We're going to try playing with some advanced typography features. So let's say that I'm creating a newsletter for the professional writing program at Purdue. Let's make this a little bigger so we can see. Advanced typography features things like color, which you've probably already experimented with before, kerning, the space between the letters, leading, the space between the lines, scale, the width of letters, and small caps. You can also experiment with tabs, so pressing the tab button in Word, or using the paragraph features to play with indentation to experiment with alignment. If you want to use the advanced font features in Word, go up to the Home ribbon, click the little arrow next to font here, and it'll open up a menu for you where you can play with things like the scale of letters. So if we want to really stretch them out. The spacing of letters. If we want to condense them a little bit, or if we want to expand them to give them a little bit of room to breathe. Additionally, we can play with things like small caps. Like having a little bit of additional room here in between the letters. And then if you italicize it, it really amps up the emphasis and makes it look a little less like boring old Calibri. So we've played with our fonts a bit. An additional thing you can do in Word is use the shapes feature to add different shapes, circles, squares, and rectangles. Insert, up in the navigation ribbon, shape takes you to a menu where you can use shapes to box off content by making sidebars or callouts, adding rule lines to separate different sections. There's a line I can use to separate my header from the rest of my content. You can make shapes that serve as screens to go behind text. Let's say I want to box off the header here. You can make arrows and more. Notice if I make this box, it goes in front of my text and obscures it. So you can arrange the elements in the page like you would layers of a collage. Remember collaging when you were a kid and you cut out pictures from a magazine and pasted them on top of each other? You can kind of do the same thing here. If I right click my object, I can bring it all the way to the front, which is where it is now, or I can send it backward. And just kind of click until it goes behind the text, or click send behind text. I can also do things like changing the transparency. This blue, as you can see, is a little bit dark. It's kind of hard to read the text. So if I right click and click to format the shape, I can do things like change the transparency, make it a little bit more transparent so it's easier to read. Removing the outline makes it just a box. You can use these semi-transparent shapes to make frames on the page. But then you'll see that I still have to type text in Word's standard linear way. Erase the formatting here to get rid of that kerning, the space between letters. So to give yourself more freedom with aligning text in different ways than Word's default format, you can try playing with text boxes. So let's say that I want to have some content over here for my newsletter and maybe put images over here. So instead of just typing my content, I can go to Insert, Text Box. They have lots of different options for text box formatting. I'm just going to make a simple one and remove this stroke on the side, this border, to make it a transparent text box. So I can make the text box whatever size I want by clicking and dragging. You can make it transparent by selecting Shape Fill and No Fill. So whatever's behind it, you're going to be able to see through the text box. You're also going to want no shape outline if you want it completely transparent. You can make your text box as small or as big as you want by clicking on these anchors on the side and dragging them. And this bypasses Word's typically restrictive formatting. So you can just put it wherever you want. You can click and drag the text and place it wherever you want. So images. I have another video where I talk about places where you can find royalty-free images or images that aren't copyright restricted. But to integrate these images with text, you're gonna wanna use the text wrapping feature. So I'm making this newsletter about the professional writing program. I go to Insert Picture to put in an image. I already have this image of college students. I can't drag it anywhere. I can't move it, and when I do move it, it breaks my formatting, it gets rid of the text box. So I want to use the text wrapping feature to be able to move this image wherever I want. So after you insert the image, go to Format, which pops up here in the navigation ribbon, and click Wrap Text. I like to wrap my text tightly around the image, but there's also options to wrap text around square, to put text through the image, to have text on the top and the bottom, or to send images directly behind or in front of the text as background or a centerpiece. So if I use tight here, and I make my image smaller than the full page, you can see now I can drag this around wherever I want. And if I didn't have this text box, if I just had text on the page, the image would cause the text to move and it would wrap around the image. This again breaks Word's typically restrictive formatting and helps you to bypass it. I recommend, if you're designing a report or a set of instructions or specifications for the first time, that you find an example that you like and seek to recreate it, to emulate it in your design program of choice. In the case of Word, now that you know these key features of creating text boxes, shapes, and adding text and wrapping it, you can do some more advanced things. Like, for example, finding an annual report that you like this one from PepsiCo, and recreating it. You see this page of the brand overview for PepsiCo in 2016? You could easily remake this in Word using different font weights and sizes, as well as playing with the space between letters and the aspect ratio, making text boxes for each of these spots of text, as well as creating rectangular shapes using the shape tool and sending them behind images to box off these different rectangular spots on the page. I hope now you feel like you have a better understanding of all the things you can do with advanced features in Microsoft Word to create documents that look more professional and less just like 12-point text double-spaced on a page. Happy designing!